Well, hello and welcome to our Wednesday webcast with me, Scott Casson-Rennie, and himself, Al Coates. And this week, we are joined by MarieLouise and Larry. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Evening. Hi.
Hello. Who are a little bit worried because they didn't read the email correctly. No, I'm joking. Or Al didn't communicate it properly. One or t'other. But
we'll get our lawyers to sort that
out. So this is the third in our series of webcasts on kind of transracial adoption and race and racism and all that kind of stuff. So next week will be our final one on this topic, I believe. Is that correct?
No. There's another week after that.
Oh, is there? Oh,
yeah.
You didn't let me away with it, did you? Damn, because I'm not here next week.
Again, we're back to not talking. We're not back to not reading emails, aren't we? There, Scott. Anyway.
So tonight we're talking to MarieLouise and Larry. And do you guys want to introduce yourselves and tell us why we've asked you on?
Yeah, do you want to go first?
No, after you.
Okay. Well, we're just a small family of three, and we got a 9-year-old son who we adopted 8 years ago, I think, and that was a transracial domestic adoption. So that's why we're here. We'd love to talk more about all sorts of things of colour.
So was that my first question, really, because I tend to think about the practical things and I'll ask all the highfalutin questions. Was that something that you set out to do, or was it just a natural thing that happened?
How do you mean the
like so when it came to family finding, was it just something that you set out to do? You know, but was it something that was kind of
you mean the transracial aspect?
Yeah.
No, it wasn't an intended goal, but it certainly was something we're completely open to.
Yeah.
And very receptive to. It wasn't really a factor.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, we told them that we didn't matter what color they were and what sex. And when we said it didn't matter what sex the child was, they said, okay, then you're 99% certain to get a boy. They said, because they are less desirable than girls for a lot of the doctors, interestingly. And we also said we really didn't matter which background they came from. And they steered us a bit. They did say, we won't give you a child that isn't at least half white, because we're both white. And we said, okay to that, but there was no way we were going to get a fully black or fully Indian or fully brown. And actually our adoption story did take a long time. It took us 7 years to end up with a child. And for many reasons and so on. And one of them was the ethnic matching, because we're both foreigners. And now I believe that's why we didn't get placed. We weren't British.
I think when we started looking into adoption, there was a different kind of ideology, at least in the council where we were, about being quite rigorous about a specific ethnic matching. And that seemed to exclude domestic adoption. And so me being from the United States, we explored adoption in America, and that's a wholly different world in all aspects of how matching works and being selected by birth mothers, and I think the whole issue of ethnicity there. I don't think it was really discussed in any kind of sensitive way about the meaning of it all. It simply was about the market. But anyway, that's the sort of thing where we definitely in our minds had to model and think and just that's the first context in which it became very clear that one of the kind of families that might evolve for us would be one of different races together. So it turned out, that during all that process, the context for international adoption and the attitude, international adoption changed, and then the attitude to transracial adoption domestically changed, and we started the process over here in the UK, which would have been more desirable for us anyway. And by that time, I think there was more flexibility about ethnic matching, or however you want to describe it, and that allowed us to have our beautiful son.
Yeah.
And it is worthwhile mentioning, obviously you've both pointed out, but just to confirm, you are living in the UK and you did adopt in the UK, because you both obviously got non-UK I don't know if non-UK accents is a thing,
Yeah,
but you
yeah.
know.
Yeah. They don't
You
say
know.
that back in America.
Bet they don't. Can I ask you a question a little bit about America? Because we before we came on live, you were mentioning it briefly, that the attitude to children of color and how that influences on in the adoption system. You kind of, could you explain that for people who may not be familiar with the US system?
It's kind of so long ago, but at least the system we were in was the sort of thing where we looked at lots of different agencies, and we finally found one that we were happy to work with. But then just as we were kind of looking around, there were kind of schedules of fees and payments, and quite frankly, they varied depending on the ethnicity of the child. And it was very shocking to me that African-American children literally cost less to process the adoption because I suppose there was less demand. It's horrifying to say. And
you got them quicker too. The waiting times were
and it's horrifying, it's heartbreaking, all those things you can imagine. And remember, I think about, I don't know, celebrity adoptions from, American celebrities adopting from, virtue signaling with third world countries, and you think about, what's going on in the United States. That's why when we felt that we weren't going to be able to adopt where we live, the country I thought of was the United States, where there's such a pressing need and terrible, poverty, and amidst all that wealth, it's shocking. Anyway, that's it was very, well, I don't know, it opened up a lot of perspectives. And
the agency we went to, and this was standard to a lot of them, you did get a menu card and you had to tick ethnicities, and in at least 2 of them that was a very long list. So it would be Native American, African American, Native American, African American, white. So it was all these mixtures. You would have Hispanic, Native, and we just ticked them all. And I remember thinking, "Ooh, that sounds beautiful." And gosh, yeah, can you imagine? And sort of all the way down. But they really questioned us on that. They said, "Are you sure? Are you sure you could deal with this? Are you sure that you want a fully Black child?" And so, and again, it was just sticking your toe in a quite. I see that as racist, the way that it was dealt, or at least a reflection of a society where I hadn't thought about just how much color matters. I come from a super homogenous background. I'm Scandinavian, so
I didn't see it as so racist, but it was because I grew up in a very mixed American kind of milieu. I went to predominantly African American middle school, and all that sort of stuff. So, but a kind of reflection of the realities of what American culture is like and what the implications are, and how difficult. There are different issues there. But I don't really want to. I haven't lived in the United States for a long time, but it was. It was just this kind of. In one way, it's horrifying, and the other way, it's kind of. I guess you could say everything's upfront and out there. There's no hiding about it. There's no fancy language. It's like, okay, this is what it is. Literally, this is what it costs, and this is what it means. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Which is very different to the UK system, because we know that the children of color are overrepresented. Children of specific ethnicities are underrepresented, but others are high represented. And so coming back to the UK, you then sort of find yourself going through this process. And I was just wondering, what sort of preparation were you given? Because you'd flagged up that you were willing to take a child of different color. Was there any specific preparation in relation to that?
Not.
We did we went to a couple of, kind of workshop things about that.
But that was us who wanted to do it.
Well, it was made, we knew that it was available to us. But, looking back, I think it was an awful lot of.
Awful.
Well, not even, even just that adoption is, you can talk, and then when it happens, you realize that, it's the runaway train, and that's it. You're in for the ride, and there's not a lot that when it's no longer a simulation, I guess. I don't know. You look back and think, well, did that workshop on this really, do anything other than just scratch the surface and make you aware that there's a whole thing I mean, do you think you spend a day learning about attachment theory? You think, okay, done that, great. And then you realize basically, attachment is like this, it's going to be a lifelong discussion and reflection. You know, it's not something you say, yeah, I've had training, right? Well, I think it's similar when thinking about transracial. You're made aware that there's a thing you're going to be thinking about and discussing and pondering identity and the relationship. I mean, I do remember having some of the training where they, 5 minutes in some, I remember we looked at a couple of videos of young adult adopters who felt that they had been denied a chance to understand their ethnicity. Yeah. And you think, that's interesting. Yeah, okay, well, we won't do that. And we don't know what that means, really, in that context. And me, I think I grew up, frankly, if I can, in a more multiracial environment than a lot of kind of, middle-class British families, or middle class in an American sense, but and even so, I think I was very naive about all that.
Yeah. I think that's becoming more clear how naive we are about a lot of things. So while we would have been open to take a fully Black child or fully, of a completely different ethnicity to us or cultural background or whatever you want to call it, I can now see that I think the advice from our very good assessing social worker that we should have a child that was at least half white, so we have something cultural sort of in common, was the right one, was right. But of course we have to learn a lot of things now. So while our son is a mix of several sort of cultural backgrounds, so we are both very white Protestant, aren't we? In our backgrounds. Okay, you're not?
Yeah, I suppose. I draw the line at Protestant.
Okay. Well, still, from that out of the world, and
yes and no. But I mean, part of my background, I never knew my birth father, so so it's interesting, in a sense, I'm half adopted, could you say? Which that's an interesting thing when you I think considering adoption, you can think a lot about what common ground you have in terms of your ethnic background. But there are other, bridges and links to adoption stories where, I feel that my situation doesn't mean I will ever fully understand my sons, but there's some common ground there, which it might be more powerful than if I had the same ethnic composition, but wasn't somewhat adopted myself. You can slice it in different ways, but anyway.
Very much.
Yeah.
So you mentioned briefly about your approval, and was that something that was woven into the approval questions in relation to how you would manage, or how you would, was it questioned, was it asked, was it, were you grilled?
Not in any way that was very deep, I think. I mean, we did have some issues with one of the matching social workers feeling that our
that's true. I thought about that one.
Feeling that our milieu here was too monocultural, our street, our neighbors.
Yeah, which we hadn't thought about because it is quite, it's relatively mixed here. So we showed a picture, which I actually think sealed the deal.
It's super interesting. Well, the story behind that too, right? Because when we were, basically you've got to prepare a sort of sales brochure for American adoption to make yourself attractive to a birth mother.
Yeah.
And one of the things we did was just try and say there's a community here of friends and neighbors, and we're all really keen to welcome you into our lives. And we asked, a lot of our neighbors were really supportive, and we had a friend who was a photographer, and we all gathered, just young families and parents on our street and stood in an empty room and took a photograph. This is our kind of bubble, as it were.
Who we are, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the parents was Black, and she came up to me before the photograph and said, "Listen, are you sure you want me in this photograph? I don't want to wreck things or compromise your chances."
Yeah.
And I was
really
shocked by that. It was a generous act on her part, and it actually, cynically, her inclusion in the photograph was just the opposite. But it just didn't even occur to me.
No.
and her and their kids were in the photograph.
Yeah, just who lived.
Who lives on our street?
Just our little section of the street.
But looking back now, this is like much more than 9 years ago. It was a interesting kind of foreshadowing of the whole, issue of how people think about that stuff.
Yeah, which we
just
have
hadn't
been
just not on our radar.
shielded from. Yeah.
Not on our radar at all.
So, I mean, that's the sort of an introduction to raising a child of a different color to yourself. So, sort of, I'm looking at the time, so I'm going to move you on a bit, because I think we could probably spend an hour just talking about preparation and even the process itself. Thinking about then being the parent to a child of a different ethnicity, what are the things that come to mind? Challenges or observations that you would have on that?
Well, one of the things that I thought was very interesting, you came back to say, is the way he looks. He could kind of maybe be our child, if maybe not with each other when you see them together, but sort of. So he looks he's quite pale in that sense, except in the summer. Remember the first summer where he must have been about 4, where he was visibly darker than us, and we talked about that. We were sort of always looking at, because I'm so fair-skinned, I can burn like nothing, and you have a sort of slightly more olive complexion, and he can take the sun, even on the beach. He doesn't really need sunscreen unless it's really, a whole day without any shade. And there we looked at it, and we talked about it, and we talked about that would have come from his birth father and so on. And he's still, just the other day, having not spoken about this for years, he talks about that also being a moment when he realized that was it. But so what I wanted to say is that we don't necessarily see him as that much different. We talk about the different elements of his cultural sort of background and so on, but
he's very proud of his
black part,
of his African heritage.
Unfortunately, we can't get any closer than African, which is the real stigma.
It's interesting with his kind of mixed background. He's also a bit of a mirror for people to look at him.
Yes, that's what I wanted.
Black people often really see that he's partially African heritage, but a Mediterranean person sees an olive-skinned boy with curly black hair, and he could be Italian or Spanish or French. It's really interesting in that way that I think it shows the way people view those kinds of mixed heritages.
Have you had any sort of challenges in relation to how people have responded to him and you, or you as a group?
No, we've been quite lucky, but I do this thing about the subtleties. I think it'll become more apparent. But you'd come back, you'd met a Brazilian woman who instantly saw it, which I thought was she comes from a country where
she was
very mixed.
She was quite a posh, a rather grand Brazilian lady, and she saw a photograph of my son. And of course, I think the colorism in Brazil is pretty profound. It's very interesting, that idea. And we were in France, and she looked at his photograph and said, "This is my son." I didn't say any more. She said, "But il est noir."
Yeah, he's black.
But he's black. Yeah. It's very interesting, because if you grew up in Puerto Rico or Cuba or Brazil, I think people are used to making these, weird calibrations, literally on a spectrum, that are pretty alien to us. And that's it's almost like another aspect of white privilege. You don't see it, doesn't mean it's not there. Say, I don't see it, that doesn't exist, but it does.
That is complicated, isn't it? Because skin tone is we're white, just there's one shade of white, we're all white, but those nuances are often not available to us through our own understanding. So have you sort of had to then take yourselves on we mentioned this briefly with Twana last week when we were talking to her, and she was saying, sometimes it's reduced to listening to Bob Marley and, eating plantain, and that's kind of a cultural education. But have you had to sort of take yourself and learn stuff that you'd never anticipated, or kind of develop your knowledge of, race and racism and culture that in a way that you hadn't anticipated?
Yeah, I certainly have, as a coming again from such a homogenous background, where there's a lot of discussion in Scandinavia at the moment about racism. And certainly in Denmark, they're saying there is no racism there, which I just think is so naive. So I guess I'm learning a lot about that white privilege and things that we can't see and things that we haven't lived up with and been raised with. And in Denmark, definitely, it's still very homogenous, although less so than when I grew up. But it's very, so there's this exotification of of people who are Black or mixed race.
That's
so
a very
few
common European phenomenon until
Yes.
the numbers get to a certain level, and then what becomes exotic becomes threatening. But
yeah.
I guess I could draw upon my experiences, you know, with African American culture, which were fundamental
Yes.
to me growing up, and I think that's been very, very useful for me in thinking about his life and talking to him about these things. As he gets older, it'll be more and more apparent, I think. But I mean, that's been, you know, as I say, it's something I've experienced my whole young life, much more so than since I moved here, I have to say.
Yeah.
But also, I think what we've always done is just make sure that with him, we grow up with not just having white dolls, for example. There's a whole lot of things about round toys and so on that you see quite quickly that we need to do something different here. We need to diversify our library, and we were quite good at that when we was little, and we still have lots of black and brown dolls and so on. But we realized, actually, with Black Lives Matter and the killing of George Floyd earlier this year, I suddenly thought, hey, hang on a minute, he's now 8. It's not as diverse for that pre-teen, tween, and teen. We need to do it again. So it's a lifelong thing about just making sure that there's enough for him to sort of reflect himself and to sort of see other things. And it's not just a color scale, it's also sort of, for me, the old feminist comes up as well. It's just making sure that it's more diverse than just a very white story that, well, certainly I grew up with. Yeah.
I think the challenge is, like many things, is that, you know, with adoption, is you have to just remind yourself to keep revisiting and going over, because the perspective changes as a child grows older, and the discussion about what all that means is different when one's 5 and when one's 12. And you haven't, you know, you can't say, oh, we've done that. We understand one another, because the understanding changes and evolves all the time. And I think that's a challenge for me, not to be lazy about, you know, needing to renew, examine.
It's really interesting what you say, because it's a little bit like if you're not living, I mean, obviously you two are parents to someone who's mixed race. It's very, I did this last week, and I'm sorry, Al, I know you hate it when I do this, but it's similar to homophobia. Unless you live it, you don't experience it. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of a very similar thing. But interesting, MarieLouise, because you segued into my next question, which was about the Black Lives Matter movement and how you guys are feeling about it, dealing with it, and how, you know, your child is dealing with it as well. I mean, you know, he must see it. He must be aware of it. You know, it must be.
We actually we have a newspaper for him, and I didn't feel that they dealt with racism at all. It was sort of buried, that whole story, way into the newspaper, and I simply got another one on top of it. Say, okay, from now on, we're going to see how these newspapers actually deal with it. There's not just one kind of news. But we talked a lot about it, and we were talking about, did we want to go into central London and so on. I have seen some really nice things, because this was quite early on in lockdown, of people, as I felt a very strong need to take a stance. And then actually it happened that there was some local things going on, but I would have stood outside my house, and you said that there's no point in that. You have to go to at least a sort of traffic light or something where people actually stand. And then he came home and did this thing where he asked, what does this mean? He's Black, and then he had a equals, but with a strike through, less. And he wrote that down and said, what does this matter? And that became, he just sat down, made that placard, and we did go out and we did say our thing. So
we went to a rally,
yeah, we did, and
stayed to the social distancing.
Became difficult.
Yeah.
But for me, the Black Lives Matter, it was great. There was lots of conversations, and he has a black or mixed race godmother, and we talked a lot to her about it as well. And she was saying that she's now hearing white people having discussions that normally is reserved to the BAME community. So that felt nice, and we do have a fairly diverse group of friends, sort of in many aspects of.
The thing that's difficult about it is we do talk about it, but it's very difficult in an age-appropriate way to kind of talk about the grotesque and horrific violence.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, I don't want.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
That was the bigger issue to me, was how to
explain
what's catalyzed all this without going into
Yeah.
details of what happened and what can happen.
And
I mean, he already feels when we go to America, then, you know,
yes.
there's the
Yeah.
baseless security guys with, you know, machine guns, and
Yeah.
you know, it's just that whole kind of thing. I don't think we need to go there in any detail, but in terms of the consciousness and the fact that terrible things have happened, and of course, one of the places we've been to in America is Atlanta, and that immediately stimulates talking about Martin Luther King and civil rights. And
it's an ongoing discussion, definitely. And the thing that had been the hardest for me to talk about, and again, it's not just one conversation, this is lifelong, but it is this notion that what racism is, that because of your skin color, people will think less of you, you know, depending on it. And that's really difficult. And I know there are many more difficult discussions to have ahead of us. So it's all about keeping that discussion going. And for me, again, acknowledging just how little I know about this and how much more I need to keep on educating myself, and that it has to be an ongoing conversation. And then going back to adoption, I think there's a sort of added layer, and it's totally intermeshed, that it's the heritage and identity is at the heart of what adoption is. So it is our job as parents to give our son pride in what he comes from, no matter what that background is. It is what he is physically. And so I really feel that we can't be blasé about this. This is, you know, this is ongoing. I don't want to have another moment. Here you go. Du må ikke komme ind nu, fordi vi er faktisk live. Skal du ned og lave noget andet? Musen, kan du give os 5 minutter til?
This is the joy of live podcasts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This is your BBC moment.
Yeah, this is a BBC moment. Yeah.
Yeah. It's better than our normal BBC moments where our children come in and try and wrestle us to the ground. So it's much more sedated.
Normally filling up the wine glass, as you know, but you know.
Well, you are a bohemian. You are a bohemian. I was gonna. I'd like to.
I have a question next, so shut up.
Okay, I'll keep quiet. Hopefully, well, shall we keep talking so that if anyone who can speak Scandinavian, that's a language. Yeah. So
I'll just say, well,
he's now joined us right there, but I told him not to come in.
Yeah, no, that's fair, and he's very welcome to listen to us drone on. I guess that was my next question. That was about, because last week when we were talking to Twana, is that how it's pronounced? Because I couldn't get it right now. So she was saying that actually, in some ways, adoption really doesn't feature for her, because there's so many layers of it. I mean, I know you're
another thing.
Yeah, it's just another thing, you know. So she was brought up by a white parent, and she was black, and as her sibling. So I guess my question was, you know, do you feel like your family, because we don't live it, we don't know, because I'm white and I have white children. Al's white, but he has kind of, you know,
I have lots of children.
Yeah, exactly. Too many children, actually. The social workers should have done the job on that. But anyway, so I guess my question is this just your normal? Is it something that you think about? Is it, you know, okay, we're dealing with that layer today and that layer tomorrow, and, you know, next week it's this layer? Or is it just, it's just life?
I think it's just life. And I actually think that's where it belongs. You know? So that discussion about race, color, identity, heritage is just as welcome as now I want to talk about my birth mom or my
Yeah.
birth dad or whatever. It's just that door is always open and has to remain open. And so all those difficult conversations, they're going to continue. So, and that is what we signed up for, I
Yeah.
think, in essence. So even if, finding out that I'm so horribly naive about a lot of things, well, that's just where I am right now. I also can't feel too bad about not knowing what I know, but it's just carry on,
Yeah.
carry on educating ourselves.
Can I ask one question, which is maybe reflects a little bit about my own experience, because some of my children are mixed. One of the things that I've found is I've had to work quite hard to keep reminding my family that my children aren't white.
That's true.
Which sounds stupid, but actually, so what is that your experience, and what do you think that's all about?
Yeah, that is true. My family have said some rather outrageous and
they
things.
They veer between kind of exoticizing, and then they think that the highest compliment they can pay is to say there's no difference.
Yeah,
and kind of impose that there's no difference.
Yeah,
which is pretty.
Yeah.
It comes from a good place, but it's not helpful.
And it's also certainly I grew up with this thing about colorblindness, which now I think is like so unhelpful, and it does again come from, if you like, a white privileged place.
Because at best it's naive, and as you said, Larry, it comes from a good place, but potentially it's dangerous. And I've really had to work hard to inform one of my children to say, you need to know you are different. You need to know that the world will not see you like your auntie sees you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, I think that's the case.
But then again, we did. I was at an exhibition with him once with all these portraits. There was a Dutch female artist, and they were huge portraits of white, Dutch people on the beach. And in amongst all those portraits, there was one that was black, and he must have been about 3 at the time. And I had him on my arm, and he said, "Look, Mommy, there's one just like me." And then he jumped down and ran away. And my friend, who's also totally white, she said, "I think you're doing an okay job," because he's probably the only one who sees himself as black there. But
well, I remember about a year ago, there was this Tutankhamun exhibition in Chelsea Barracks, and our son was very, very keen to go, and we made a huge, big day out of it, and we went to see
that's black culture too.
Yeah, and of course Egyptian culture. There's a whole strain of scholarship about that, but they're definitely not white people. But that wasn't the issue at all. It was King Tut, it was gold, it was mummies. We had a great time. There was virtual reality, all that, and we went back and we were talking about it for days after. And then he said something about how much he loved the exhibition, but it was really weird going to Chelsea. And I said, he felt uncomfortable. And I said, "Why is that?" He said, "There was nobody like me on the streets, King's Road." And
so he sees it.
That was like an awareness, an antennae that, I just think, London is a great multicultural, and certainly the big we live in is, but that was so, that was a moment where you think, okay, I may think I'm on this in a certain degree, but there's room for improvement, shall we say, because, that was really, really interesting.
A work in progress.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I'm looking at the time, and thank you so much for giving us your time, and I appreciate you going ahead because
on Facebook.
Live. Yeah. There's no cataclysms.
You two are going to be scrolling through your emails later just to double check what the requirements are.
Crikey, that's your lawyer getting in touch. He's going through them already. So thank you so much, and we'll put this up on the podcast tomorrow. And I know that you also do. I know, MarieLouise, you were massively involved in the We Are Family support community right from the beginning, and I know you've done a great job there. So you are a proper friend of the community. So thank you so much.
She's proper.
She's the real deal.
She let me talk the first time in front of over 100 people, and I was absolutely mortified. And it came up the other day, actually, because I don't know why, but me and Gareth Marr, because Gareth Marr, it was getting towards the end of Gareth's life, sadly. and MarieLouise had booked Gareth Marr, and he couldn't talk. He couldn't physically talk because of his illness, and I had to go along and deliver. And I remember Gareth Marr going, "You'll be fine. You'll be fine. You just need to put on your big boy pants and sort yourself out." I just remember that night. It was one of the worst nights of my life, but actually afterwards it was fabulous. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, it's a good one.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and I'm going to turn the live off now, and we can kind of say goodbye properly after that. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.